So here we go with these people. They're all working against each other, and yet every single one of them is working towards the plan that God has played out for them to have it the way it's supposed to be. Hey, and welcome to Bible 365. I'm Kathy Carter, and I'm bringing you the Bible in 1 year every day. I'm reading it first, and then I come to you and I share my thoughts about the reading and about life and about everything that goes along with what it means to live the life of a Christian and why. What does that have to do with the Bible? So I'm using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan, and that is from a site called oneyearbibleonline.com. You would go on their site, download their free printable reading plan, or you can purchase one of their Bibles, which is chronological, or you can click on a link that says, it shoots you to your daily reading at Bible Gateway. So if you have never been with me before, I always go backwards to go forwards because I'm a big advocate of the Old Testament. I think that you can't get the full effect of what the New Testament means or who Jesus is without going backwards first. So I give like a ridiculously short synopsis because we don't have a ton of time. But if you want to dig in and get the real deal, I want you to go all the way back to the beginning. Day one, I start in Genesis. So here is for 2 minutes-ish, give or take. The Lord made the world. He made everything in it. He made everything in the universe. He made everything in the galaxy. He made everything you can ever think to have been made. He created all of those things. On this earth, he created everything. He made this, in some ways, I'm going to say he made this a haven for us because he made a perfect world in which we could perfectly live. He created us from the dust. He breathed life into us. He made us in his image, and then he put us in a place that we did not create where we could use everything and eat everything, and it was perfect for us. He also put a tree that was the knowledge of good and evil. And he said, you guys can't eat from that tree. You can eat anything else in this garden. Like, you name it, the world is your oyster. That's the one thing that you can't eat. And a tempter came in and tempted them to break the rules of the Lord, to eat the very fruit that the Lord said that they couldn't eat. Tempter came, they were tempted, they failed in their temptation, they ate that fruit, and then they severed the relationship between the Lord and between humans, the people that the Lord created. They also broke the world. So part of the curse that was meant to happen was that the world was broken and it was no longer perfect for us, which is probably why you see things like the reason that everything don't grow constantly and all the time. Since that time, he has been sending people to save the nations and draw them back to the Lord. So bad things would happen, and then he would send people in order to save that nation, draw them back to the Lord, and then that nation was meant to draw the rest of the world back to the Lord. So then people would be in communion or in relationship with the Lord, which is something he has always wanted. And then humans never really fulfilled that. They didn't have the ability to do that. So he made a plan to send a Messiah, a Savior, and that Messiah was going to be human, and it was also going to be God. It was going to be himself. And so it wasn't even just that it was a God, like some small God that he had given power to. It was the actual Lord. So he sent himself in the form of a human who was born through Mary. His name was Jesus, and he came into the world and he started his ministry in the world. And his ministry was originally to draw all the Israelites back to the Lord. And again, I always say this, he was drawing the Israelites in who would then draw the rest of the world in. So he went all up and down Israel in order to draw the Israelites in. He healed, he resurrected, he gave power to some of them. He exorcised demons. And he also did teachings. And in all of that, some people hated him, some people loved him and followed him. And these Pharisees, the leaders of the nation at the time, came together and decided that he was wrong for the nation and that they were going to kill him. So this is kind of where we're finding ourselves today, sort of at the end. And so it is November 4th. Oh my gosh, I don't think I did this ever. So it is November 4th. It is day 309. Our reading is Mark 5:21 through 41, Matthew 27:32 through 56, and Luke 23:26 through 49, and John 19:17 through 37. And so they're all kind of going over a very similar thing, which was at the end where Jesus had been beaten and he had been mocked, and he had been up for trial. Pilate had given the ability to release him or release this insurrectionist named Barnabas, and they all chose Barnabas, and they chose to crucify Jesus. So when you are crucified, you need to carry, and I know I've definitely talked about this before, you need to actually be the one that's carrying your own cross. So as they're walking to their death, they're carrying the means of their execution. And so they have to drag that from down in the area where they first get tried, and then they have to carry it all the way to their execution location. This was not abnormal. This was something they always did. Well, for whatever reason, and I'm going to go over whatever reason I think it is, Jesus did not carry his cross. And so it says, a certain man from Cyrene, this guy named Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing on his way in the country, and they made him carry the cross. So some random guy from like northern, Ethiopia, northern Africa, it was like in the Libya territory, was making his way over, and they grabbed him and they had him carry the cross for Jesus. So I'm going to make an assumption based on that and based on what we've heard already, that Jesus was so beaten and bruised and in such, I don't want to even just say pain, he was so physically unable to carry the cross that someone else needed to carry it for him. Maybe he wouldn't have made it all the way up the hill. Maybe he just couldn't stand upright. Maybe he was so weak he couldn't carry it at all. Whatever it was, he was physically unable to carry the cross. So they had to drag someone out in order to do it. So someone else. Now, I want to note that in the book of John, it actually says that he carried the cross himself. So there are definitely some differences in some of the readings, which again, for me, like, these people are human. John seems to have wrote his, and it's like always about the audience you send it to, but the audience, the writer, right, timing and all these things. But I don't want to say that as if that means that they then forgot. And so then we can't take any of it to be true. So we have to take it really for what it is, that there are some minor discrepancies in there, some things that look a little bit different. There might be a reason, right? Like God has them in there for a very specific reason. Not sure necessarily what they are, but there is a slight difference where John seems to think that he made it or he carried it himself, and the rest of the authors said that somebody else carried it for him. I'm prone to believe that someone else, because where would they randomly come up with a story that someone else carried it for themselves? It seems like a more true and detailed story, although these guys weren't actually there. So who knows? Anyway, moving on from that, it says, so they met this guy named Simon from Cyrene, and it says there they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall, but it says after tasting it, he refused to drink it. And this also fulfills that prophecy from before that said that he wouldn't taste wine, or he wouldn't take of the vine until after this was over. It says, as the soldiers led him away, a large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. What's funny about this is, now that I'm reading it, I actually thought that the women that mourned and wailed for him were all of the women that we see eventually following him. So one of the notes that's going to happen in John is we see that Mary Magdalene was following him. Mary, his mother, was following him. So there are a handful of women that were with him all the time, and they were actually here following him. They were at the crucifixion. That's not these women. These women are the wailing women. And so what we have noted before, I'm pretty sure I noted this, but maybe I didn't. And I know somebody actually did write it in my comment section at one point, but there were women that were hired to cry behind certain events. So they would go to funerals and they would cry. They would go to hangings and they would cry. So they would go to all of these very serious, sad situations, and they would be paid to loudly, obnoxiously mourn in front of the rest of the people. And so he turns to them, because I remember reading this the first time thinking he turned to the women that were following him, like the women that loved him. But it wasn't. He was talking to these wailing women, and he turns to them and he says, daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves and your children. Like, he's going where he's supposed to be going. And he's like, but it's going to be bad for your children and for you. He said, the time is going to come where you're going to say, blessed are the childless, the women that didn't bear any children. because it's going to be so bad in your area. And then he says, they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and the hills cover us. And that's from Hosea 10:8. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read King of the Jews. And people were mad, and they didn't want it to read King of the Jews. And they were like, change that. He's not King of the Jews. Say he says he's King of the Jews. And Pilate's like, listen, it's done. What's done is done. I've already written it in there. So here we go with these people. They're all working against each other, and yet every single one of them is working towards the plan that God has played out for them to have it the way it's supposed to be. So in their hatred towards each other, right? Like Pilate doesn't like the people of Israel. And so he writes this kind of probably in a mocking way. He writes King of the Jews because Jesus admitted that he was king. So he writes that down on his kind of inscription underneath where he gets crucified. And they're furious about it. But he doesn't seem to care. And they don't even want it written down on there. So it says, those who passed by hurled insults at him, and they said, so you who are going to destroy the temple, come on down and save yourself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross so that we may see and believe. And once again, they're like, do tricks for us. You think you're something so great, do tricks for us. They lack the understanding of who Jesus is. And I know this is a point that I kind of keep coming back to. Again, I'm going to say this is why we're supposed to be reading our Bible. The point was not for him to show his power to everybody so he could be so powerful. Oh, wow, look how amazing this guy was. Every single thing that he did pointed to God. His whole purpose in being here on the earth was to point to God. It wasn't to point to himself and how powerful he was. By the way, we're going to see later, everything that the humans do are to point to Jesus, who's pointing to God. And so that's it's kind of bringing everything around to kind of remember exactly who God was and what God did for all of these people. So it says, when they crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And we're going to see that again a little bit later. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. They come to this place called the Skull, where they crucify him there, along with the criminals, one on either side. So he's in the middle, and he's got a criminal on either side. And then Jesus says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. And I think that he is talking to not the ones who sent him, because if you remember, the ones who sent him to the cross, he said their sin is greater. It's greater than Pilate's. Like Pilate didn't necessarily know what he was doing. The Sadducees and the Pharisees and the lawyers and the scribes, they all knew what they were doing when they sent me here. And so their sin is greater. The people who are putting him on the cross, who are probably all Roman soldiers and centurions, they don't know what they're doing. And so he seeks forgiveness for the action for which they don't know that they're doing, right? So they don't know they're killing the king of the world. They don't understand that. Only the Israelites are supposed to, or at this point, only the Israelites understand that. And so he asks for forgiveness for them. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him, so everyone was making fun of him. So then one of the criminals is hurling insults at him and making fun of him. But the other one yelled at the criminal, and he was like, don't you fear God? Since you're under the same sentence, we're here, we're supposed to be here. What we did, we deserve the punishment that we're getting. He said, but this one is innocent. He said, this man has done nothing wrong. And then he says, remember me, Jesus, when you go into your kingdom. And Jesus says, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus sees his mother there, he turns to John and he said, this is going to be your son. Turns to his mother, this is going to be your son. And he turns to John and he said, this is going to be your mother. Which would be weird if Jesus has siblings, right? Like, why would Mary choose to have John as her son when she has plenty of sons? Because the taking care of the wife, of the mother, would be through the sons. So again, something I've mentioned in the past, so I apologize if you've heard this before. When a woman doesn't necessarily have a lot of power, so she's mostly taken care of by other people. So that's why a woman does better when she has sons, because when her husband dies, who's usually older than her, and in here we know that Joseph has probably died. When her husband dies, she will have sons that will be able to take care of her. And so here you think to yourself, Mary already has sons. Why would she give them to John? Mary's other sons do not believe that Jesus is the Son of God, which is something that we have seen in the past. We saw his brothers mocking him, his brothers and sisters mocking him about coming to the festival. And so they don't follow Jesus. They don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. John does. So John and Mary, in some ways, are the same family because they both love the Lord and they're both following Jesus, recognizing he's the Son of God. That's why I think that Jesus gave Mary to John, knowing that there were actually siblings there and they could genuinely take care of them. And it's funny, it was what I was thinking when I was reading it, and this actually isn't true because I wound up looking it up. But I was thinking, like, maybe this is where godparents come from, right? The whole idea of godparents is kind of what John is, right? Like, John is a follower of Jesus that's taking care of this woman who will be unable to take care of herself after Jesus dies. But that's not where it came from. Godparents didn't come into effect until like 800 AD. So you can look it up. All right, now it says, at noon, so this was 3 hours later, darkness came over the whole land until about 3 in the afternoon. So for about 3 hours, darkness came into the land. And then it says, Jesus cries out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which again is another wild and crazy statement, because why would God forsake God? God is there. He is himself. It doesn't make any sense. I think a couple of reasons. One, this is a repeat of what David said in Psalm, I have it written down, in Psalm 22:18. So David was shouting out at this when he was going through some of the hardest times in his life. And so again, I think Jesus is giving a nod and a wink, recognizing that he is the one, right? The one that is the son of David, right? That's come down and that's going to hold the scepter. And so I think he's clarifying that statement. And I also think that there is, when Jesus does wind up dying, when he loses his physical life, that there actually is for the first time a separation between God and Jesus, right? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I think that there is an actual separation when he dies. I think there has to be, in order for that payment to be fulfilled. It says he's listening, he's calling for Elijah, and then there was a loud cry. Jesus breathed his last, and then the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So the actual curtain inside the temple was torn into two pieces from top to bottom, which you feel like should have been a sign for some people, like this is crazy. And it said the earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tomb after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people, probably in regular human form. And people went, is that Jeremiah? Is that what, I'm going to keep using old ones like Ezekiel, Isaiah, right? Is that these people? They weren't like bodies that had decayed in the ground, but they were actually, because people had seen them. Because if you're thinking like thriller video, which again is exactly where my mind goes to, it's unlikely that that's what it looked like. But there were people all over that had been dead and that people were actually seeing, and there were eyewitness testimonies that people were seeing these prophets that had already died. Now, it was a day of preparation. So at this point, Jesus is on the cross. It was the day of preparation, and they were looking to see. So Jesus had given up his life. He said, God, why have you forsaken me? And Jesus had given up his life. Not everyone seemed to know at that time, even though it was dark, even though the veil was torn, even though bodies are coming up out of the ground, right? Like all of these things that they're not necessarily paying attention to. Not everybody knew, but they were like, we've got to get these bodies down, because it takes actually a really long time for someone to be crucified. In general, it's hours upon hours upon hours and out, right? It's not 3 hours. It's a significantly longer period of time than that. And so they were like, listen, we got some stuff going on. We got to speed up this process. And so they would break the legs of the people that were being crucified, so they were no longer able to kind of like push down and hold themselves anymore. And so then this is terrible, it would collapse their lungs and they wouldn't be able to breathe, and then they would wind up losing their life. And so they went to do it. They did it to the two other people. And then when they came to Jesus, they realized that he was already gone. And then it says, once again, it says, Instead, one of the soldiers then pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, which is John, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that many will believe. The whole reason I'm writing this book, John, the book of John, is so that many people will believe. These things happened, so I'm writing this book so you guys will believe. The things happened so scripture will be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And as another scripture says, they will look on the one they have pierced. And this is from Zechariah and it's from Psalms. So they have a couple of different things in there. And that's how we end today. So how we end is Jesus has now given up his life. He has given it up for the people. And they cast lots. All these other prophecies were fulfilled. And then we're going to see what winds up happening tomorrow as we read. And if this has been a blessing to you, I want you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And then I want you to keep reading, and I will see you next time.